Hello guys, so today we're going to discuss about unsupervised learning, and we're going to go into details about k-means and variations of the k-means algorithm. I will start the lecture once you tell me that you can hear me well. So when I get the feedback from you guys, I will start the lecture for today. So just let me know in the chat if everything is fine. Okay, thank you. So yeah, just a quick reminder about unsupervised learning. So in unsupervised learning, we have data without labels. So the goal is basically to discover structure in data. And we have two canonical forms of unsupervised learning. Excuse me. So two canonical forms of unsupervised learning. Clustering, which is about grouping data based on similar patterns, and dimensionality reduction, which is trying to project the data in a subspace where the representation is more meaningful. So in our lectures, we are going to discuss about k-means today, dbScan, hierarchical clustering in our next lecture, and about principal component analysis and t-SNE in our last lecture. So the first three methods are for clustering, while the latter two methods are for dimensionality reduction. So of course there are also other algorithms that can be applied here, so we will not go into the details of other approaches. Okay, so clustering is the task of grouping a set of data points in the same group, such that those that belong to the same group are more similar than to data points from other groups. And as I said before, there are several clustering algorithms, and we can create, let's say, a taxonomy of clustering algorithms based on the approach. So first we have centroid-based approaches, in which each cluster is represented by a prototype object, a center. So here we have k-means and variations of the k-means algorithm. Then we also have density-based clustering methods. So these methods consider the density of the data points and assume that points in, for example, in dense regions should be clustered more carefully. So perhaps more clusters are required for these dense regions. So the main idea is that the approach takes into consideration the density of data points in the space. So here we have the dbScan algorithm that is going to be discussed in the next lecture. And we also have distribution-based methods. These are based on statistical distributions. So here we have an extension of the k-means algorithm to Gaussian mixture models, and we are going to briefly present this approach in this lecture. Then we also have graph-based clustering methods, such as highly connected subgraphs, and also hierarchical models, in which instead of partitioning the data set into a group of objects, they consider a hierarchical grouping where objects can belong to different groups in the hierarchy. Okay, and in another taxonomy, we can also divide the algorithms based on the relation between objects and clusters. So first we have hard clustering approaches. So these are partitioning methods in which one object belongs to a single cluster. And we also have soft clustering approaches. So we will discuss about soft k-means today, which belongs to this type of approach. So soft clustering is also known as fuzzy clustering. So in this type of clustering, the object doesn't belong to a single cluster. Instead, it has a degree of membership to each cluster. So it can have a degree of membership of 1, or of 0, and so on. So yeah, this is the taxonomy of clustering methods. So now we're going to discuss about k-means. So we had a brief introduction in the last lecture, but now we're going to discuss in more details. And we're also going to present why the algorithm converges to a solution for k-means. So k-means is a clustering algorithm that partitions the data points into a fixed number of clusters k. So first we're going to discuss about the approach, and today we're also going to learn about ways to find the optimal number of clusters k. So of course, one approach, as in the bag of visual words, you can use a fixed number based on the empirical results that you obtain. So you can start, let's say, with a small vocabulary of visual words, and then you gradually increase the size of the vocabulary until you obtain the optimal results. But there are also generic approaches that do not take into account the downstream task. In this case, it would be for all the bag of visual words. The downstream task is object recognition. So if you don't have a downstream task, so you just have the k-means algorithm that is applied on some data, then you can, and you don't know the number of expected clusters, you also have ways to determine the number of clusters. Okay, so since this is a centroid-based method, each cluster is represented by a prototype point. And every point in the data is assigned to one of the cluster, the one with the nearest centroid. So in this approach, we want to minimize the sum of the Euclidean distances between data points xi and the nearest cluster centroids mk. So this is the within cluster sum of squares, or also known as the variance of clusters. So this is the objective that we want to minimize. So here we have a sum that goes from cluster 1 to the number of clusters k. So here we use the notation big K for the number of clusters, and k is the index of the cluster. Okay, so I think here I might have an extra space. Yes. Saving. Going back. Okay, so yeah, k is the index of the cluster and y is the index of the example. And here we consider all the indices that belong to cluster ck. So ck is a cluster assignment. So it's actually the c is a vector that is the same size as the data set. So it has the same number of components as data points or feature vectors. And in this vector, we have natural numbers, and each component is the cluster index associated to the example xy. So then we can write this type of notation. So CK would be all the examples that belong to cluster C, and I in CK contains these indices of those examples. Okay, so k-means is based on an iterative method that converges to a local minimum. So each time you initialize the algorithm, you select a random set of initial centroids. So if you start with a different initialization, you will go you will obtain in the end you'll obtain a different solution. So finding actually the global optimum is NP hard, so it's not a tractable problem. And yeah, there are ways to improve the initialization to obtain better results. Okay, so starting from our objective, the algorithm that minimizes this objective is the expectation maximization algorithm that adapted to k-means works as follows. So we initialize the k cluster centroids randomly, then we iterate until the clusters converge using the following two alternative steps. So first we have the expectation step in which we label each vector based on the nearest cluster centroid, and then in the maximization step we recompute the centroids of each cluster as the mean of the feature vectors or the data points assigned to the cluster. Okay, so we illustrated this algorithm also in the previous lecture, so let me go through it once again. So we have the random initialization. So we take some random points from the dataset, and these will represent the initial cluster centroids. So what we do first is we do the cluster assignments. So we take all the data points and assign them to the nearest cluster centroids. So we build the assignment C here, and then we recompute the cluster centroids in the maximization step, and we alternate then. So we remove the cluster centroids, we reassign them according to the expectation step, then we recompute the clustering, the centroids, and so on. Now we reassign the cluster, the points to the nearest clusters. We recompute the clusters based on the new assignments. We remove the assignments, and so on. So at some point the algorithm should converge to a solution, which means that in two consecutive steps the assignments will no longer change. So this will be the final k-means solution. Okay, so one question for you would be to try to figure out what kind of structure will be generated by the k-means clustering algorithm. So when you try to group the data points into clusters, these clusters will have a specific shape, let's say, and or yeah, geometrical formation. Can you guess what this formation would be? Okay, I'm waiting for the answer. Maybe the slide is not relevant here, but maybe yeah, you got some intuition, but try to think of all the clusters together. So yeah, it can be a diamond, but you can have actually, so it's maybe not related only to this example, but to maybe to a more generic case. No, yeah, so try to think about the boundaries of these clusters. So yeah, I try to represent them here with ellipses, but actually the boundaries, the clustering assignments are actually based on a different structure. Okay, so we have a good answer from Raphael. Indeed, so when you do a clustering, for example, over a 2D, a data set of 2D points, you get a Voronoi tessellation, and this extends to other dimensions. So for each cluster, you have the median that separates the neighboring clustering centroids, and you get this tessellation of the space. Okay, so yeah, the mathematical formulation. So we go back to the objective function that we optimize, and we rewrite it like this in order to understand how the optimization process works. So we have here the notations, the data set X. So these are the data points that we want to cluster. We have K, the number of clusters. So since we have K clusters, we will have K centroids here in the set M. So these are also vectors from R of n. So then we have this objective function that can be rewritten like this. So here we have the sum from the cluster 1 to cluster k, and for each data point in the cluster we compute the average distance from the point and the median, the centroid of that cluster. So then we can rewrite the function like this. So here we have a sum from all data points. So actually this goes through all the data set, right, of points x. Then for each cluster assignment, we can rewrite the objective by using these variables z of I and k that can have the value 1 if the current example xi belongs to the cluster ck, or 0 otherwise. So if the current example belongs to cluster k, then we have the distance between the two clusters, the Euclidean, the two points, the centroid and the data point. So this is the Euclidean distance. Otherwise, if xi doesn't belong to cluster k, then this will be 0, and the distance will not matter anymore. So yeah, this is equivalent of this objective function. So here we have the definition for z of I and k, as I explained before. And here another constraint that we have is that the sum of these assignments over the clusters is equal to 1. So this means that, so actually maybe you can guess what this constraint is related to. Yeah, I think maybe it's a good intuition for you to guess. So yeah, what is this constraint about? Can you guess? So this is the sum over all clusters, and this sum should be valid for every example I. So yeah, so in the end, so I'm still waiting for an answer, but I'm going to the objective is to minimize this distortion measure L with respect to Z and with respect to the centroids mu. So actually the expectation and maximization steps are related to optimizing the objective alternatively with respect to these two variables. Okay, so we have an answer here. So indeed this constraint is added because each point should belong to a single cluster. So this is a hard clustering approach, a partitioning. So indeed, if this sum will be greater than 1, it means that the point I will belong to, I don't know, if the sum is equal to 2, it will belong to 2 clusters. So we don't want this, we want the example to belong to a single cluster, so therefore we have this constraint in place. Okay, so now with these notations and this rewriting of the distortion function, the algorithm looks something like this. So we have the initialization in which we choose some random values for the centroids mu k, and then we iterate until the clusters converge. So in the expectation step, we minimize the objective L with respect to the parameters Z while keeping the centroids fixed. So here we do the cluster assignments. Then we have the maximization step where we recompute the centroids while keeping the assignments fixed. So in the expectation maximization algorithm, we keep one of the variables fixed and optimize the other, and do this alternatively until the algorithm converges to a certain solution. So for the expectation step, we want to minimize this loss function with respect to Z while keeping the centroids fixed. So recall that there must be only one Z of I and k equal to 1 for all the i's. So this means that xi will be assigned to a single cluster. So in order to minimize our objective, we have to set Z of I of k star equal to 1 only if k star is the minimum distance between xi and mu k. So yeah, this ensures, so we are optimizing here the objective. So we're trying to optimize this part, so actually to minimize, yeah, this part. So then in order to minimize it, we have to assign the example xi to the cluster that has the minimum distance with respect to the centroid. So in the end, we need to assign the example xi to the closest centroid. So this ensures that we optimize this objective. So the only way to minimize it, or the best way to optimize it, is to assign the example to the nearest cluster centroid. So that is the expectation step. And the maximization step, here we want to minimize the same objective with respect to the centroids mu k while keeping the clustering assignments fixed. And in this case, we notice that the objective function is a quadratic function of mu k. So in this case, we can minimize by setting the gradient of the loss function with respect to mu k to be equal to 0. So the gradient of this function is equal to, so we apply the derivative here, so we have the square which goes in front here as a constant that multiplies this this sum. So we have the sum after I that okay, so this is the first, this is the derivative with respect to the centroids mu k. So we are referring to a specific centroid. So here this sum component gets eliminated because we only have for the current k. So here we only have the sum after I of this part. Okay, so we have the 2 that goes in front here. Then we can distribute these vector z of I and k to each component and rewrite everything like this. And this should be equal to 0. So then the centroids, so in the end the solution for in order to minimize this objective is to set the centroids equal to this, that this is extracted from this part, so we can eliminate the 2 here, and what we are left is z of I and k multiplied with xi divided by the sum of z of I and k. So this is equivalent to, so actually doing the average of all the data points xi that belong to, that have this component equal to 1, right? So this is equivalent to the average of the examples x that are in the cluster ck. So yeah, this proves that we are optimizing once again this objective, so when we are computing the average, we are optimizing this objective with respect to the centroids. Okay, so yeah, this is the maximization step, and when we do these joint steps alternatively, we obtain an optimal solution for the algorithm from the current initialization. So once again, the solution depends on the initialization, but for a specific initialization, we obtain the optimal solution. Okay, so k-means has parameters that can be adjusted. So we have the number of clusters k. So how do we choose the number of clusters? Well, there are 2 approaches here. We can use the elbow method. So the elbow method is based on starting with a small k value and increasing it until adding another cluster does not result in a much lower distortion value. And this means that the new cluster does not explain so much the variance in data. So much. Okay, so the other approach is called the silhouette coefficient. So this is a measure of how tight each cluster is and how far apart from other clusters is. So here we have a measure that tries to see how the clusters are distributed, and also tries to take into account the intra-cluster agreement and the inter-cluster distance. So in this case, we will choose a value k that results in a clustering with a large silhouette coefficient. So in ideal conditions, we will obtain a peak in this case for the optimal value of k. So first, for the elbow method, we show a simple example on how we can choose k based on this approach. So we start with k equal 1 and gradually increase the number of clusters. And as we add more clusters, we look at the value of the objective that we use to optimize. So this is a pretty straightforward approach. So we just consider the value of the objective. And we observe that at certain point here at cluster 4, we observe this elbow formation. So this graph, if we interpret it as an arm, the elbow will be somewhere here. So this means that as we add more clusters, the variance in data so the distortion value will be lower and lower, and this means that also the variance will how much the algorithm explains the variance will drop. So here it will not drop significantly. So we should observe this elbow point, and this should be the optimal number of clusters. And yeah, this is obtained for this very obvious data set with 4 clusters. And you can see that the elbow is actually corresponds to 4 clusters. So this means that the optimal number of clusters for this example is 4. And the same can be obtained with the silhouette coefficient. So this measures the tightness of clusters, referring to individual clusters, and also the separation between different clusters. So the silhouette measure, denoted by big S, is equal to the average of the silhouette scores with respect to each data point xi. So the silhouette score for a data point is equal to b of xi, which is the lowest distance to all the points in a different cluster. So for example, this is the average distance with respect to the nearest neighboring cluster. So we can compute these average distances with respect to, let's say, other cluster centroids, and we take the distance with respect to the nearest one. And a of x and I is the average distance between x and I and all the other points in the same cluster, excluding itself. So this will be the silhouette coefficient. And this is divided by the maximum of the 2 distances. So of course, in some cases, the data point xi can be farther away from its cluster centroid than to points in a neighboring cluster if it is close to the margin. So if you consider the lowest distance to all points in a different cluster, so instead of the average, we can also take the lowest distance, so that can be smaller. So then we have to divide the score by the maximum of these 2. So yeah, this is the silhouette coefficient, and this coefficient is supposed to be to attain its highest value when the number of clusters k is optimal. So the silhouette coefficient here is small because the within cluster distance is big here. So we have points that are in the same cluster but are very far away. And for 4 clusters, we obtain the maximum silhouette score. And here the within cluster differences, intercluster distances start to make to represent to be larger for some data points here than the within cluster distance AI. So the scores will start, the silhouette score will start to decrease here. So we have the maximum here 4, and this should be chosen as the optimal number of clusters. So of course this is an example in ideal conditions. In practice, this function can have different peaks, and also for the elbow method it might not be that obvious. Yeah, so these are commonly used approaches, but they don't always work well in practice. And this is also because the problems that we are about to discuss next. So as we stated earlier, k-means converges to a local optima. So this means that there, from two different initializations, you can obtain different solutions that look like this. So yeah, in this case we used k equal 5. So here it is, we have 5 clusters. Sorry, no, k equal 4. So this is the optimal number of clusters. But even if you use the number of k equal 4, which is the optimal number of clusters, the clustering will not necessarily result into the expected clusters. So these data points, as these are the same as here, and we expect the clusters to look something like this. But in practice, depending on the initialization, we can obtain a clustering such as this one, or a clustering such as this one. So for example, in both cases, one of the clusters is divided in 2 subclusters, while 2 clusters are joined together. So in this case, when you apply the elbow method, you perhaps want to reinitialize the approach and take the minimum of all the trials in order to obtain a better estimation of the elbow point. Anyway, to address this problem, as I said, you can either run the algorithm multiple times and choose the result with the lowest distortion or the highest silhouette. So this is a possible solution, but now this is not really straightforward, because you have to decide on how many times you rerun the algorithm. Does this depend on the size of the data set, and so on. So there are some issues here. And alternatively, you can use a better initialization method that we're going to explain next. And actually in practice you can use both. So you can use this better initialization method, but this does not necessarily converges to the global minima. So you can reuse this to run the algorithm multiple times, but using this initialization that is called k-means plus. Okay, so yeah, this is an example with the first approach. So we run the algorithm multiple times. Here we have three runs, and these are the solutions that we presented in the previous slide. And as you see, if we get the clustering right, then the distortion is smallest, and also the silhouette score is the highest. So you can do multiple runs with the same k and choose the clustering that has the smallest distortion and the highest silhouette score. So this will be probably a solution that is closer to the not probably, it will be closer to the global optimum, but we are not sure that it is the global optimum, right? Okay, so the alternative approach is an idea that was introduced in 2007 by Arthur et al. So this is called k-means plus initialization. And the idea is to choose the initial centers such that they are spread out over the entire data. And the algorithm, the initialization algorithm, works something like this. So first, what you do, you randomly choose the first center from the data points. So there is still a random initialization here, and this is why also the solution is not ideal. So when you rerun the algorithm, you may end up with a different initialization and a different solution in the end. But at least we know that k-means ++ should be more stable. And then you try to choose the other centroids. First you compute the distance from the data point xi to the nearest chosen center. So you choose the centers and then you compute these distances. And then you randomly choose a new center, considering the probability p of xi proportional to the square of the distance. So as the data point is more farther away from the first example xi, we assign it a higher chance of being chosen as the new center. So then we choose our second center and we repeat this for k times until we get all our centers. Okay, so then we run the standard k-means algorithm. So this is only a change in the initialization, and the algorithm is called k-means ++. So okay, so in another direction, so we have these initialization methods, and now thinking about the clustering assignments. So if we have two different cluster assignments, can we measure how these compare to each other? So for example, one could be, let's say, the ground truth clustering assignment, and the other one could be the clustering assignment given by k-means. And the question is, how can we compute an overlap? So actually the cluster indices, so here we have, let's say, cluster 1, 2, 3, 4, and here we have cluster 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this will be, let's say, the indices assigned to clusters. So for example, here cluster 2 will correspond to cluster 4 here. And cluster 2 here will correspond to cluster 1. So each color will have here a different number. But these numbers don't matter with respect to clustering. We just care more about the overlap of the two clusters. Okay, so but also the clusters are not identical. So as you can see, so this cluster has less data points than this cluster here, and the actual labeling is not important, only the grouping. And one way to measure the overlap is using the RAND index. So the RAND index takes all the possible pairs of data points and is based on adding the number of pairs that are the same in both assignments. So A is the number of pairs of points that are in the same cluster. So for example, if we take these two data points, these are in the same cluster. These two data points are in the same cluster. So then we add these up here. Okay, so then we also have the number of points that are in different clusters in both assignments. So we take this point here and this point here. So these belong to different clusters here, and these points also belong to different clusters here. So this means that these are in different clusters in both assignments. So yeah, we have here, so we can look at these, let's say these two data points, the red one and the light blue one. So here these belong to different clusters, and here they belong to the same cluster. So in this case, these will not be added neither to A nor to B. Okay, so essentially when the clusters agree, it means either that the 2 points are in the same clusters in both clusterings, or the points are in different clusters in both clusterings. So we just count how many pairs are in agreement and divide this by the total number of pairs. So this is the RAND index that can be used to measure the overlap of clustering. And we also have an adjusted RAND index, which takes into account that results might agree by chance. So of course, if we take all the pair of data points, we can also have some coincidences here that 2 points are in the same cluster by chance. So the adjusted RAND index tries to minimize this the effect of random chance. Okay, so yeah, the limitations of k-means are obvious if we look at these examples. So here we would expect, for example, so these are some common data sets that are used to evaluate clustering algorithms. So this is a Mickey Mouse dataset where we have three clusters of data points, the one here, and the one in the center. Here we have some Gaussian distribution clusters that are skewed. Here we have two clusters that are yeah, obvious for human eye, but are not linearly separable, and k-means will try to do a linear separation. And also these clusters that have the same center, so this will probably generate, so maybe in a bigger data set will generate a single cluster, but if you do k-means, they will be divided in two clusters, something like this. Okay, so yeah, in this case, there will be some data points from this part that will be assigned to these clusters, and this is because k-means doesn't take into account the density of the space, and it virtually tries to assign equally sized clusters, to make equally sized clusters from the data points. So it will probably output something like this. In this case, the clustering can be missed altogether, and this is because the distances in some direction are small and the distances in other directions are bigger. So in this case, the centroids, so the clusters are completely mixed together from what we expect, and here also the nonlinear, this nonlinear cluster formation is also not properly clustered as we would expect. So yeah, k-means produces only convex clusters, so this problem is observed here and here. It does not handle non-spherical clusters, so these are skewed here, so it's not a spherical cluster, it's more skewed. But even for a spherical cluster, it tends to produce equally sized clusters, so even these are not separated as we would expect. So there are some variations of k-means that improve the results on these cases. So the first variation is to use soft k-means. So in the in the standard algorithm, we use this assignment function z of I and k star with 1 and 0, which generates a hard clustering. And in practice, so this idea of soft clustering is motivated by the fact that in practice some clusters might have overlapping region. So here we have two clusters generated from spherical distribution, two spherical distributions that have some overlap here in the middle. And when you do hard clustering, the points here, we cannot be sure that they belong to this cluster or the other cluster. So perhaps a more soft assignment here will be more appropriate. So in soft k-means, we redefine the expectation step such that these assignment functions, the clustering assignment functions, become a degree of membership for the example xi to cluster ck. So for example, in this case with two clusters, we would expect that points here will have a membership of 0.5 to both clusters. And of course, the membership can be continuous. So a point here may have a membership of, let's say, 0.8 to this cluster and 0.2 to the other cluster. And this effect can be obtained by updating the expectation step like this. So the assignment z of I and k now becomes a soft assignment which is proportional to the distance of the example with respect to the current cluster centroid. And actually, in order to, so this is the distance, and what we have here is an RBF function. So we use the exponential of minus beta of the Euclidean distance. So this transforms the distance which takes values from 0 to plus infinity. It transforms it into a space between 1 and 0. So as the distance so if the points coincide here, the distance will be 0, and here the value of the RBF function will be 1. So when the distance approaches infinity, this RBF function will result in a value close or very close to 0. Okay, so this is divided by all the sum of the RBF values with respect to all the clusters K. So essentially, these values for the example I will have the sum equal to 1, just as before, as in hard k-means. But this time the values will be proportional to the distance from the centroid to the example, or actually so the smaller the distance, the higher the membership value. So they will actually be inversely proportional, not directly proportional. Okay, so this is the update for soft k-means, and in the maximization step for mu k we use the same. So remember that the centroids are computed based on this function. So if z of I and k was this function here, this will result in the average of the data points assigned to a cluster. But if z of I and k is this function, then here will result in computing the average, but also taking into account the membership value assigned to the example. So an example that is closer to the centroid will have a higher weight, and the example that is farther away from the centroid will have a smaller weight. Okay, so this is soft k-means, and yeah, when we apply it to the previously seen datasets, it doesn't solve the issue of unequally sized or non-spherical clusters. So it has some benefits, but it's not a solution for all these cases. So in order to solve these problems of equally sized clusters, we can try to use Gaussian mixture models. So these are probabilistic models that assume that data points are generated by a mixture of normal distributions, and these are the Gaussians. And we can use the same algorithm, the expectation maximization algorithm, to fit the Gaussians by maximizing the likelihood of data. So the Gaussians can estimate the ellipses. So in these cases, Gaussian mixture models will output better results than k-means or soft k-means. So yeah, we're not going to detail too much about this approach, but just to mention that this can be viewed as an extension of soft k-means, in which the cluster has both a mean, so the centroid, the average, and also a covariance matrix that gives the shape of the non-spherical cluster. So it means that the cluster can have different variance on different axes. So it can have also an ellipse shape. Okay, so another update, which is even more powerful, is to use kernel k-means. So we learned that we can change linear classifiers such as SVM or ridge regression into kernel methods, and the same can be applied to some clustering or some unsupervised approaches such as principal component analysis or k-means. So we have the dual solution for k-means, which is called kernel k-means, and also for PCA. So PCA, we're going to discuss it in the last lecture. Yeah, so for kernel k-means, we have we show here how we can change the k-means into a kernel form. So in the expectation step, we have these. So this is for the hard k-means. So we have the assignment z of I and k star with this function. So here we try to explicit the distance between xi and mu k. So this is actually the norm, the L2 norm, which is given by the squared root of the scalar products of the differences. So it can be computed as the squared root of the scalar product of the differences. So what we can use then here is to use the distributive property of the scalar product and rewrite these as the squared root of the scalar product between the vector xi with itself, the average mu k with itself, and this is subtracting 2 times the scalar product between xi and mu k. So this will give us the scalar product between the vector of differences between xi and mu k. So now when we expand this, we obtain, so this is the norm of the vector xi. This will be can be rewritten like this. So here we replace the average, the centroid mu k, with its formula. So the average vector is equal to the sum of all the vectors S in the cluster K. And here we do the same change. Here we need to make sure that we do not use the same notation for these two vectors here. Okay, so then we once again use the fact that the dot product is distributive. So now we can take the sum here in front and rewrite this component as 2 times the sum, or actually the average, because it's also divided by the number of components in K, of the scalar product between the vector xi and s. And here we do the same, and we obtain the sums of after s and t of the scalar products between all the samples s and t in the cluster K. So now in this form we have eliminated the average, and we express here the criterion using only data points from the current cluster. So then we can rewrite the clustering, the criterion like this. And here we have eliminated this component which does not influence the criterion. So also the square root. So in the end, if we replace the expectation step, so actually we assign 1 where so essentially, yeah, we replace the criterion, the objective here, with this, and these are equivalent, and now we can estimate the assignments without considering the average of data points. So right now we can do k-means without computing the centroids, so we can directly compute the assignments like this. And this expression now depends only on the dot product of pairs of training examples. So we have the dot product here and the dot product here. And as you know from kernel methods, now we can replace the dot product with another kernel function. So for example, now kernel k-means, we can assign each point to a random cluster, and then we repeat this step until no change occurs. So now we have only the expectation step, and the maximization step is no longer required because we don't need to compute the cluster centroids anymore. So we just repeat this optimization step until the algorithm converges. And the good thing is that here we can replace, as I said before, the scalar product with a kernel function. And if we use a kernel function that is nonlinear, such as the RBF kernel function, we can obtain nonlinear solutions. So for this example, if we apply kernel k-means, we can do a random initialization of the data points, and the clustering boundaries will look something like this. So then when you so at first the data points are not assigned to clusters, so you just assign the points to a random cluster. Then you update the cluster assignments, and now the data points belong to the current clusters, and you repeat the algorithm, and it will converge to the solution that we desire. So using kernel k-means can can output nonlinear clusters and can solve problems with clusters that look like this, that require nonlinear solutions. Okay, so in Python, you have the k-means algorithm in scikit-learn. You also have the silhouette on the adjusted rand index in the metrics package, and you also have Gaussian mixture models implemented in scikit-learn. So when you run the k-means algorithm, by default it has k-means plus plus initialization, and it does 10 runs, and it chooses the run with the lowest distortion measure, and you can here provide the number of clusters. So as in classification models, you can call the fit function to compute the cluster centers, and you can also apply the predict function to obtain clustering assignments. So this can, for example, you can also fit it on a training data set, and you can also predict the cluster assignments from data points that are not in the training. So here x does not necessarily have to be the x that k-means was trained for. And yeah, in summary, k-means is a clustering algorithm that partitions the data points into a fixed number of clusters. Each cluster is represented by a centroid, and the points are assigned to the cluster with the closest centroid. We use the EM algorithm to optimize the objective function, although it can get stuck in local optima. The number of clusters k is a hyperparameter that can be tuned using either the elbow method or the silhouette coefficient. And we can also obtain a non-convex solution using alternative approaches such as soft k-means, Gaussian mixture models, and kernel k-means. These are extensions that can deal with some of the limitations of k-means. Okay, and this was my last slide. So yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. Write them down in the chat, and I will try to answer these for you. So let me go back to the chat here. Yeah, so the data sets are multidimensional, of course. Yeah, so first, assuming that you have some labels for the data points. So if you're trying, for example, to cluster, let's say, images based on class labels, then once you have the cluster assignments, you can compute the adjusted rand index with respect to the ground truth labels, or you can also do bipartite matching, like apply the Hungarian algorithm to find the matching cluster indices that optimize classification accuracy. Or there is also so these measures, what I presented here, the silhouette score or the distortion measure are values that you can look at and interpret without looking at the dimension of data points. But you can also look at the clusters that you obtain by visualizing the data points using t-SNE. But we will discuss more about t-SNE in the last lecture. So basically, once you get the cluster assignments, you can also so yeah, I think I started actually the lecture with a graph, a t-SNE graph. So actually these data points are data points from the MNIST database. So this is from a recent paper that I published with one of the PhD students. Juliana Georgescu. So we proposed this clustering algorithm for images, and then we clustered the images with our algorithm, and in order to see how the clusters look with respect to the ground truth labels, we analyzed the Disney visualization. So here we have the clusters that we obtain, and here we have the visualization of the cluster assignments. So you will find here some overlap, so we have some visual interpretation of how well the clustering looks, but of course we also have a classification accuracy that can be indicative of the actual results. So here, if you apply a clustering on algorithm on the MNIST database, you can also look at the clustering. You can also look at the classification accuracy because you have ground truth labels. So perhaps the most meaningful way to analyze the clustering result would be also to look at some ground truth labels. Okay, so yeah, this is bigger. MNIST is bigger than 3D. It has 784 dimensions, so you can do that. Okay, other questions? Let's wait for 1 or 2 more minutes. If not, we can end it here. Okay, so until if there are no more questions, perhaps one more thing to add. So I also checked the calendar, the academic calendar. So it seems that next week we'll have Christmas Eve, so it will be a vacation. So this is the last lecture for this year. So the next lecture will be on 7th of January next year. So this means that I will take this opportunity to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and hope to see you all well in 2021. Yeah, so next year we will have 2 more lectures. One on density-based clustering, dbScan, and one on principal component analysis and Disney. So yeah, this is also related to the question of Rafael. So you will also learn about how to obtain these visualizations using Disney. So more on this after the new year. So okay, it seems that there are no other questions. So thank you guys for the participation, and see you next year. Clustering algorithm. Okay, so let me just give you a quick answer. So for the MNIST dataset, we proposed an algorithm. So yeah, it was not presented in the slides, but we have a paper here that presents the algorithm. So I'll try to yeah. So you can read the paper on arXiv if you're interested in this clustering approach. This is called agglomerative clustering. Yeah, so you can read more about it in the paper, and if you have questions, you can email me about the clustering approach. Okay, so thank you guys for participating, and yeah, once again, Happy New Year and Merry Christmas.